Are you always this calm when someone's late to a first date? She asked, catching her breath as she stepped inside the little cafe. The man near the window looked up from his book, a half-smile tugging at his lips. Only when it's worth waiting for. Lena's heart froze for a moment, half from the charm in his tone, half from surprise. He didn't look like the kind of man who said things like that. His coat was old, his shoes scuffed, and his hair damp from the misty October morning. But there was something disarming in the quiet way he spoke, something that felt steady. "Ethan Cole," he said, standing to greet her. "You must be Lena." She nodded, shaking his hand briefly. "I am. And I hope the wait didn't kill your enthusiasm." "Not even close." They sat by the fogged window of Harper and Bean, the kind of cafe that always smelled of cinnamon and old wood. Lena wrapped her fingers around the mug, letting the warmth bleed into her hands. She hadn't wanted to come, really. Her mother had insisted. "He's kind, normal," she'd said. "After everything, you could use normal." Normal was fine. Safe was fine. But safe had never surprised her before. "You read?" she asked, nodding at the dog-eared paperback near his elbow. Ethan chuckled. "Keeps me from arguing with myself." "That sounds healthy," she said, smiling despite herself. He shrugged lightly. "It's cheaper than therapy." The conversation eased into quiet laughter, the kind that doesn't demand effort. He told her he worked in educational projects, helping schools secure grants and funding. It sounded vague, but not dishonest. When she asked what he did for fun, he said, "Feed stray dogs, mostly." She thought he was joking, until he tore off a piece of his scone, leaned toward the door, and whistled softly. A scruffy golden retriever padded up from outside, tail wagging. Ethan opened the door just enough to hand it the treat. "See," he said when he sat back down. "Told you." Lena blinked, watching him. No pretense, no performance. Just a man who gave what he had. Most men she dated came with polished smiles and long resumes. Ethan had none of that, and yet he felt genuine. Like someone who didn't care to impress, only to connect. When they finished, he stood and said simply, "I hope your day is gentle." No promise to call, no dramatic farewell. Just that one line, and a smile that lingered long after he left. She laughed to herself as she walked out into the cool air. At least he didn't quote poetry. Days passed, then weeks. And somehow, Ethan kept appearing. Always at Harper and Bean. Always in that same corner seat. Sometimes reading, sometimes writing in a battered notebook. The first few times felt like coincidence. The next few felt like fate teasing her. One afternoon, as she ordered her usual chamomile tea, Lena told the barista, "If the man with the gray coat comes in today, put his coffee on my tab." The barista grinned. "The guy who tips in exact change and smiles like he's hiding a secret? That's the one." A few days later, rain poured across the city like spilled silver. Lena's umbrella had snapped in the wind, and she stood at the bus stop, soaked and shivering. Then a voice behind her said, "You look like you could use a rescue." She turned. Ethan held out his umbrella. "Take it. I've already lost the battle." Before she could protest, he pressed it into her hands and walked off into the rain, his coat dark and dripping, his grin still bright. It was absurd, silly, completely unnecessary. And yet, she couldn't stop smiling. The next evening, she came home to find her backyard fence, one she'd been meaning to fix, newly repaired. A note was tucked in her mailbox. Loose boards tightened. Should hold steady now. He hadn't mentioned it. Not once. At the school where Lena taught, she eventually invited him to a charity book drive. He arrived early, arms full of donated books, helping kids choose their first stories with quiet patience. When another teacher asked what he did for a living, he said, "I help build schools. Just not the kind with walls." That night, a colleague nudged Lena. "That guy, he's not just helping, he's invested." "What's his deal?" She smiled faintly. "He's just someone who keeps showing up." Her colleague laughed. "You don't seem to mind." She didn't. Weeks later, when Lena came down with a fever, she answered her phone to hear his voice. "You sound awful," Ethan said softly. "Need anything?" "No, just rest," she mumbled. But 30 minutes later, her doorbell rang. He stood there awkwardly, rain dripping off his jacket, a thermos and a small bag in his hands. "Chicken porridge. It's not pretty, but it works." She blinked, throat sore. "You didn't have to." "I know." He smiled gently. "Can I come in? Just to make sure you eat." He poured the soup into a bowl, set it in her lap, and said, I'll wait outside. Take your time. When she finished, she opened the door to find him still there, sitting on her porch, head tilted back, eyes closed, her dog curled beside him. She stepped out quietly, holding a cup of tea. I don't know how to say thank you, she said softly. He looked up, his voice calm. Then don't. Just get better. Something in her chest shifted, something she hadn't felt in years. Later that week, a colleague sent her a news article about a man named Ethan Cole, the elusive founder of an education foundation that had donated millions to rural schools. The photo showed him at a ribbon-cutting ceremony, wearing the same worn coat. Lena stared at it for a long time, then smiled. Of course it was him. The man who gave quietly, who waited, who never needed to be known. And maybe, she thought, that was what real wealth looked like, showing up when no one else does, expecting nothing in return. So I thought maybe this would do for now. Ethan blinked, surprised, then smiled softly. Perfect. Steam curled up from the tea between them, faint and sweet, the kind of silence that doesn't ask to be filled. When Lena went back inside, her mother was asleep in her recliner. She adjusted the blanket, brushed a strand of gray hair from her forehead, then slipped quietly into her own room. On her nightstand sat her phone, screen glowing faintly. She opened her gallery and stared at the picture she'd avoided for almost a year, her in a white dress, her ex-fiancé's hand around her waist, both smiling like they knew what forever looked like. She didn't. Not then. With one slow breath, she pressed delete. The image vanished, and she didn't even flinch. Outside, through her window, Ethan was still sitting on the porch. The empty cup rested beside him, Buster curled on his lap, both still and content. That night, Lena didn't fall asleep thinking about the man who had broken her. She fell asleep thinking of the man who had quietly stayed. Over the next few weeks, Lena tried asking Ethan what he actually did for a living, not out of curiosity about money, but because she wanted to understand him. Every time, his answer was the same, quiet and vague. I work with a foundation that helps schools. It's mostly paperwork, nothing exciting. And every time, she'd just smile. Trust wasn't about prying, it was about patience. One golden Saturday morning, they decided to walk to the farmer's market together. Leaves fell like lazy confetti, the smell of coffee and cinnamon in the air. As they passed a used bookstore, Lena spotted one of her 7th graders, Liam, dragging a worn backpack that looked ready to give out. One strap had snapped clean off. He waved shyly and hurried away. Ethan noticed too, but said nothing. Later, while Lena wandered through a stall of second-hand books, Ethan excused himself. Back in 10, he said, and vanished into the crowd. Monday morning came. During lunch, the school principal carried a box into the lounge. Someone dropped this off, she said. Inside was a brand new backpack with Liam's name on the tag. No note, except for a small card tucked inside. For someone who carries more than books. No one knew who sent it, but Lena did. That afternoon, a thank you note appeared on the teacher's lounge board, written in pencil. To the kind stranger, thank you for the backpack. I don't know who you are, but it made me feel seen. Liam. Walking home that evening, Lena couldn't stop smiling. Every small thing Ethan did, he did quietly, without an audience. And that, she realized, was rare. As the sun dipped behind the trees, she caught herself thinking, if he weren't anyone special, no title, no story, would I still feel like he's the most extraordinary person I've ever met? The answer formed before she could stop it. Yes. That weekend, they sat on a park bench, watching a squirrel steal chips from a toddler's stroller. Lena laughed, shaking her head. You never talk much about yourself. Ethan smirked slightly. I figure the less I say, the fewer mistakes I'll make. She tilted her head. That sounds like someone who's been hurt. He nodded slowly. Haven't we all? Lena didn't push. She just sipped her coffee, voice soft. If I ever believe in love again, it'd have to be with someone like you. Ethan's eyes flicked to her, startled. She smiled faintly, staring straight ahead. Someone who doesn't need to be anyone to already be everything. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Weeks passed quietly. Then one Thursday night, Lena was grading papers with the TV humming low when a familiar voice made her look up. Ethan, standing behind a podium, wearing a dark suit, speaking to a crowded room with calm authority. Every child deserves a library that feels like a beginning, not an afterthought, he said. The banner behind him read, National Forum for Education Equity. And below that, the caption, Ethan Cole, CEO, the Cole Foundation. Lena froze. Her mug slipped from her fingers, spilling tea across her papers. He wasn't a quiet foundation worker. He was the foundation. The man who had fixed her mother's fence, walked Buster in the rain, bought backpacks for kids, was a millionaire CEO who had never once said a word about it. Her chest tightened. It wasn't the money. It was the silence. The next morning, one of her students, Emily, ran up beaming. "Miss Hart, I got the scholarship. Full ride, books and everything. The Cole Foundation picked me." Lena's heart sank. Emily held up a letter with the same message. "Someone believes in you." No name. No signature. No surprise. Lena walked home that evening without calling him. She let the silence stretch until it hurt. He hadn't lied with words, but with omission. And for someone who'd been left once before by a man with secrets behind his charm, it cut deep. The next morning, she deleted his number. The package arrived a week later. Plain brown paper. No return address. Just her name. Lena left it on the hallway table for hours before opening it. When she finally did, her breath caught. Inside was her old book, Letters to a Young Poet, the one she'd given him months ago. Tucked inside the pages was a letter. "Dear Lena, I've written and torn up a dozen versions of this. Silence once felt easier than truth, but I've learned it's just fear pretending to be polite. I wasn't afraid of what you'd think of me being a CEO. I was afraid that knowing might change the way you looked at me. I'd lost everything once: money, home, peace. The woman I was going to marry left the day my company fell apart. Since then, I promised myself if I ever loved again, it would be as me, not the title. Then I met you. You, with your tea-stained lesson plans, your loyalty to simple things, your quiet courage. You reminded me what real mattered. I never meant to hide. I just wanted to be seen before I was recognized. If you never want to see me again, I'll understand. But if you still wonder, I'll be at Harper and Bean on Saturday. 10 a.m. No suits, no titles, just me. Ethan." By the end, the ink had blurred beneath her tears. Saturday morning, 9:45. Lena sat at their table by the window, her mug of tea untouched. Every time the bell above the cafe door chimed, her heart jumped. At 10:01, the bell rang again. Ethan stepped inside, wearing the same gray coat from the day they met. In his hand, a paper bag, damp from the rain. She knew what was inside: Buster's biscuits. He stopped by the door, searching until his eyes found hers. No smile. No practiced words. Just a quiet, steady presence. He walked over slowly. "I'm not great with speeches," he said, voice rough. "But if you still need someone who shows up, who listens, who doesn't run when it's hard, I'm here." He set the bag on the table. Lena stared at it, then at him. "You don't have to explain," she said softly. "But you can't disappear again." He let out a shaky laugh. "That's fair." "Then sit," she said. "You owe me a real debate about why The Catcher in the Rye is overrated." His smile broke through then, real and warm. "Only if you'll defend Jane Eyre like it's scripture." She raised an eyebrow. "Always." The tension melted between them like frost in morning light. Outside, Buster sat patiently by the window, tail thumping as if even he knew this was right. They talked for hours, about books, about fears, about starting over. And when they finally left the cafe, Lena felt lighter than she had in years. 1 year later, the porch of their small white house glowed in the early morning sun. 2 mugs clinked softly on the wooden table. Wildflowers leaned toward the light, and laughter drifted through the air. Lena and Ethan sat side by side every morning now. No phones, no noise, just coffee, conversation, and peace. Across the street stood a brand new elementary school funded quietly by the Cole Foundation. No one in town knew the man who helped kids cross the street every morning was the same one who wrote the checks. Ethan preferred it that way. Inside, Lena's mother hummed while folding laundry. Buster, older now, chased butterflies in the garden. A framed letter sat on Lena's desk, the same one Ethan had written that winter, creased, faded, cherished. Below it, a handwritten line read, "She loved me when I had nothing. So I gave her everything, starting with my heart." "Another scholarship approved," Lena said one morning, flipping the newspaper. Ethan smiled over his mug. "Good. You're never going to let them put your name on the program, are you?" she teased. He shook his head. "I don't need the world to know. Just you." She reached for his hand. "I do know." He kissed her knuckles softly. "Then that's enough." The The screen door creaked as her mother stepped out with a tray of warm scones. Buster barked once, proudly trotting up with a stick like a medal. It wasn't the life Lena once imagined. It was better. No empty promises, no stage perfection. Just mismatched mugs, morning light, a love that stayed quiet and steady and true. And somewhere in that small corner of the world, two people who had once been broken didn't just find love again. They built it, softly, slowly, and forever.